Everybody, we are here today with our good buddy Jeff from Simple Plan.
Cheers.
Jeff, cheers. So it's our fun afternoon edition of Gear and Beer today. You guys are here playing Canada Life Center tonight, and yeah, you were kind enough to come by and check out some amps and stuff. And I mean,
are you kidding me? I'm playing fucking sick amps all day. It's great.
Yeah, I mean, we first met. Oh man, it had to be like 2016, 2017, somewhere around there.
Very modern, so online.
Yeah, exactly.
It's first time face to face.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been awesome being able to hang out and we know a lot of the same people and have a lot of the same opinions about gear, and we're both gear whores that just love everything and want to try everything. I mean, my favorite thing about today was when we were talking about the amps behind us, and you were like, that Slash amp there.
It's magical, that amp.
It is. It is.
I'm always afraid to pull it out because people are like, no, this is a joke. Like, there's no way you're going to pull it, but it sounds great.
It is, honestly, if you guys ever get a chance to play a Slash AFD 100, they are, in my opinion, the best Marshall
Same.
I've ever played. So, yeah. So let's talk about gear. So, over the years, you've played a lot of different stuff, guitars and amps wise.
Not really, actually.
No?
It's always gravitated towards similar things,
Okay.
But obviously there are flavors of the same thing.
Right.
And we're guitar players. We want to change it up to often come back to the exact same thing.
Yep.
And you've probably played through rigs of players that you thought were amazing, and then you play through them and you're like, it sounds like me again.
Yep.
So I've had those moments too. I've had wirelesses that kind of threw me off, but I always come back to the same kind of vibe, always.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny that you say that. The first time I got a real taste of somebody saying, it doesn't matter what I play, I sound like me. I was doing this little event called Gear and Beer. We used to do live events before the pandemic ruined everything, and hopefully that stuff will return. But I was doing this event in Nashville, and when I showed up to the venue, it was at Soundcheck, the rehearsal space in Nashville. When I showed up, I walked in and I hear somebody just blaring blues licks, and it turned out Joe Bonamassa was there that day. And by fluke, I was moving all our amps from our storage locker in that facility to the rehearsal space that we were going to set up. And he walked out just as I was walking by. He's like, "What's that?" And I'm like, "Oh, we're a small amp company from Canada." He's like, "Cool." He's like, "Can I try him?" I'm like, "Sure." So he came over before the event started. He plugged through every amp we had, and he's like, "Oh yeah." He's like, "You know what?" He's like, "It sounds great." He's like, "Just want to let you know I'm never going to buy one of your amps." And I was like, "That's totally fine." And he's like, "And you want to know why?" I'm like, "Sure." He's like, "Because no matter what I play, I always sound like me." That was the first time I ever heard anybody say that. And
yet he plays through a $500,000 rig.
Yes. Yeah. And he sounds like him. And it is true, right? Our hands sound a certain way. I know a lot of people like to kind of debunk that myth, but I think that just the way that we mute, the way that we pick, everything, our attack, I sound different than Sammy in our, if the two of us are here and we're playtesting something, everybody in the other room knows when he's playing or when I'm playing, not just because he's way better than I am, but because I sound like a 42-year-old dad rock dude.
I'm going to drop a name now.
Yeah.
We made our second record with Bob Rock.
Yes.
So, he's first of all, the way he dials an amp is amazing. And I've learned so much from him because for him, it's 0 or 12. 0 or 12. And he sweeps really quickly. He doesn't really there's no fine tuning.
Yep.
It's either it works in the track or it doesn't, and it has to go really quickly.
Yep.
And he's got a great ear. So at some point I'm like, well, I play those parts, because I'm the guy in the band who plays those parts, right? He's like, we'll audition everybody first. I'm like, audition who? Yeah, we'll audition the singer too. So we're doing Welcome to My Life, and there's a swing feel to it, right? And I play it, and I think I'm the best player in the room to play it. And my singer plays it, and his shuffle, I think, is not that great. But he's like, no, that's the feel. Yeah, and Pierre wrote that song, so now looking back, it makes sense, But I was like, no, my shuffle's way better. But at some point, same guitar, same song, it was loose, but the right looseness, and it worked. And I was pissed off. I didn't come back to the studio for 2 days. And you know what? He was calling me nonstop to do this part that was a little faster.
Yeah.
And he's like, Jeff, you got to come back now. I'm like, I got to play Welcome to My Life. He's like, you're not playing Welcome to My Life. You're playing everything but Welcome to My Life. So the point is, totally, we all play it very differently. Same guitar, everything, but it just sounded different. And it had that feel that was necessary for the track, you know?
Yep. So with, so what's your current rig that you're using right now? Like, I know you're using our cabs.
Yeah.
But, what are you using? Amplifier, modeling? What are you using?
I'm using XFX, and I think right now, the reality of touring right now has changed quite a bit.
Yeah.
I still think that tube amps have the best feel.
I think tube amps are the least practical thing to tour with
They're
on the
very
planet.
difficult. Well, the reality is this: it's a new economy now.
Yeah.
So like, there's some thinking to do about that, and we're traveling a lot. We have like 2 rigs. We have one that's in Europe. We have one here, and we have to shift stuff. Like, anyways, guitars have to be shipped and everything, but it's very costly. So for amps, we decided, you know what? If the XFX breaks, we throw it out. We get another one, USB card it. It's done.
Yeah.
You know, so that's very convenient. But I still record with tube amps only.
Yeah.
I really believe. Well, first of all, the feel is completely different.
Yes.
The thing about, you know, those modelers is that when you have in-ears, there's no room. You're right there, so it doesn't really make a difference. You know, a tube amp sounds pretty much the same. It's right there.
Yeah.
So, but in a room, when you mic a cab, something magical happens. And again, you know, Bob Rock, he mic'd the floor.
Really?
And I was like, what are you doing? You wanted that rumble, that room rumble, and it was out of phase and everything. It wasn't perfect. And I thought it was the weirdest thing, you know, it was against everything I learned in music school. Like, you don't do that, phasing weird, like, but you used it musically.
Yep.
And there's something to that. I like the fact that real amps are not perfect.
Yep.
I like the fact that, you know, it varies in time. It varies even throughout a song. Sometimes you punch like a track 2 days later with a tube amp, and same settings, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
But it's part of the magic.
Yeah.
It's part of the shittiness of it too, but it's part of the magic.
That's always been my kind of take. Like, when I first, you know, I got a Kemper shortly after they came out. I haven't had an XFX, but I've had the Helix. And, you know, and I used to have lots of the like digital floorboards and stuff back in the 90s. So, you know, there's a lot of misconception, I think, that people think that because we build amplifiers that we're like adverse to modeling. And I'm not. I mean, I love everything. I'm one of those players that I need that cabinet. I need to be able to feel air move. That's
I've modeled
the
740. I've modeled it. It doesn't sound as good.
Yeah.
It's close. It's 90%. So it is that return, you know, that non-linear return that you get after a while, but it's worth it.
And that's for you as a player, right? Like, when the thing that's hard for people to understand often, I find, is that like that 5 to 10% difference. I actually was talking to a buddy of mine because we were talking about clones beforehand.
And I love them, you know that,
yep,
clearly.
Exactly. And same, and this kid asked me, you know, so like, you know, how much better do you think the real thing is?
They're not $5,000 better.
No, I said they're 5%. I'm like, that's
agree.
To me, I'm like, between it and like the Archer or any of the great clones of them, I'm like, it's a 5% difference. I said, but to me, that difference is the difference between inspiration and excitement and not. I'm like, and it's not that the others are bad, but there's something about certain pieces of gear, and this is what happened to me and why, you know, I partnered up with Dan with the generator, is that there's certain pieces of gear to me that when I plug into them, they feel a certain way that I become inspired and just love sitting and playing.
And it has to happen. It's like a beautiful guitar that's just like in your room. It's on a stand, right? Yeah. And you're looking at it and you're like, I have to pick it up.
Yeah.
That's worth it to me.
Yep.
You know, there is some value to that. And an athlete would never run with shitty shoes.
Yep.
They probably could get away with $100 shoe, but they pay more. Yep. Because at some point, like, if you want to push your craft to a certain level, those little extra percents matter. You know, and I had a beautiful moment earlier. You know, I was playing through the 120 and I was like, whoa, this is, and it was amazing. And I want to have that childish thing where it's like, I gotta have one.
Yeah.
I gotta have one. When you have that moment, it's important. You have to keep that spark for music to keep going.
And it kind of bonds you to that piece of gear and to that moment when you had that when you had that feeling. You know what I mean? And you chase that. Then that's what I find, and that's why we end up owning so much extra stuff because you're constantly chasing that inspiration, that feeling, and to me that's
and
where
we're being sold all day long too.
Yes.
Like there's a bit of that.
Yeah, buy our stuff. That's the point of what we're doing right now. So if
No,
you can't tell,
but for sure there's that. But
Yeah.
there's also the great players that you look at.
Yeah.
Obviously, and dude, the amount of times that I was like, oh, I know this lick, but I don't sound exactly like the guy. I need the gear.
yeah,
It makes absolutely no sense, but we all do it.
Yep.
And your tastes change a little bit. But I was telling you, like when we started, I'm a Marshall kind of sound guy.
yep,
But I've always thought that Marshalls had some issues.
yep,
And I love Mesa Boogies too, but I thought they had issues. I've always wanted the two kind of
Yep.
combined, And I am going to plug the fact that earlier today I was like, well, the 120 is pretty damn close to that low-end punch articulation that you want. And I think that's what you do as a player, You try to find that formula that works for you, For clean sounds, I've always liked a little bit of grit to
Yep.
my sound. That was important. So I've always gravitated towards that. So any amp I try, I make sure that if I crank it, it has to be bitey.
Yep.
I need a little bit of grit. Because to me, it doesn't combine well with a dirty amp if I
Yeah.
don't have that. Some guys will not like that.
Yeah.
And I've had phases when I wanted it to be cleaner. That's why we changed gear.
Yeah, I find like with clean tones, I often, or I shouldn't say often, I always want some sort of edge of breakup tone.
Sure.
I want to feel like if I roll my volume, if it's all the way up and I hit a bridge pickup and I dig in, that it's going to break up and it's going to sound, like what a Plexi's going to sound like. You know what I mean? There's just going to be like that chiminess, but also that just bit of dirt. And part of that comes from being the type of player that I am. Like, I'm not technically a great player. So I hide behind dirt, right? Like a lot of players. And that's what makes me feel more comfortable, right? So I totally understand what you're saying, because when clean channels are just
I'm not saying I'm a bad player and I'm hiding. No. I'm just kidding.
I know you're
No, but I'm
Sad.
no, I'm just kidding. No, but I hear what you're saying. I think it's more forgiving.
Yes.
For sure. But to me, it's more like aesthetically, I want that blend to be better between that 80s thing was like clean chorus, extra clean, extra chorus, into like a very kind of like, wavy kind of distortion, and that works.
Lots of distortion with chorus.
Chorus, right? So that was kind of like the glue that stuck it all together. And
Yeah.
now people are tolerating more reverb nowadays than they've ever been. I've never heard players play with as much reverb as now.
Yeah.
I'm not a reverb guy. I've never really loved reverb. I prefer delay.
Yep.
So those are tastes, But when I hear a great reverb, it's inspiring. You know? So it's things that change. There are trends,
Yep.
The Nashville guys right now are kind of pushing a lot of fashion things that are like playing tellies, for instance, like tellies are like a one-trick pony.
Yep.
But those guys make a lot of things with it, great things.
Yep.
So it's cool to have those flavors, and that's why we're always kind of like whoring out on gear,
Yep. Yeah, that's my.
You were saying that, a lot of flavors,
Yep.
it's necessary to have all these flavors.
Yeah, like I was saying before, like, again, not to just plug our stuff, like the stuff that I have on the wall, I feel like most of what we have that's non-Revv stuff does one thing really, really well.
Yeah.
And I feel like the Generator 120 does everything well. Like, it has a great clean, it's got a great crunch. And I mean, the same way that somebody else may plug into it and not feel the same way about it as I do, like this, I've had very minimal input in how our products are developed or voiced. I mean, Dan and I work together, and Dan will, often ask me what I think about something, and I'll say like it's a little dark, or it's, or it's perfect, or whatever.
Well, earlier
whatever
it was funny. I was like listening, and I was like, I'd add more presence, and naturally you were like just going for. So you got a good ear, obviously.
Yeah. So, and for me, this is like the green channel on this is my favorite sound that he's ever voiced, and I can play every channel on this amp and get sounds that I would use if I was still playing live. I would use that with zero problems, right? But I've seen other people come in and plug into them that I'm just like, you don't sound great through it, and you're a great player, but it's just your hands aren't the same and you have to dial it differently and maybe something else is more suited to you, that's totally fine. And that's why we like having tons of different flavors. That's why we have different pedals, right? Like Sean, like Tubbs is going to design or is going to dial something completely different than what I'm going to, just because of the way he plays and because he's amazing. But yeah, so I think there's just always this misconception with people that like when they change gear that it's because they either don't like something or, you know, it's not that. It's like you said, I want this different flavor now. And there's something else. Because, I mean, that happened to me. I hated Marshalls. Like, I hated them for like 15 years. And I started playing Marshalls when I started. Couldn't get enough distortion out of it because I didn't understand how a tube amp worked.
We both got rid of great JMPs because we couldn't get enough gain out of them.
100%. And, you know, and then I moved into playing boogies and heavier stuff. And then it took, you know, about 5 or 6 years ago, I heard a great JMP and a great CSA edition JCM 800. And just as soon as I heard the guy playing them, I was like, what is that? That's not a Marshall. And I mean, between that and the Slash amp, it was kind of all at the same time. I was like, hold on a second. There's Marshalls that do what I want them to do, because I've played 50 of them that don't do it. And yeah, so I understand what you're saying. And that's why I've always gravitated towards that green channel, because it's the same. The older, even though I used to play rectifiers, the older I get, I mean, I noticed this, you know, when I started my band, I played, you know, in a small band around here for about 7 years. When I started, I was always on like the modern setting, like the red setting. By the time I was done playing,
I always played the green setting.
Everyone was on the green setting or on the vintage thing, right? Yeah. And it was like back to the gain off. And once I met Dan, I remember the first time I dialed in the 120 at a show, Dan like walks up to it right afterwards and starts dialing it while I'm playing. And I'm like, why does this sound so much better the second you touch it? And you just pulled like half of the gain that I was using out.
A lot of times in the studio, I lower the gain as much as I can. I want to make sure that I hear an impact in the speakers, the studio speakers, without having all that gain fuzzing things out and blurring what I'm trying to express. But you still need to have a hit. You have to have like a punch in the face, you know, or else it's not fun. It's just not music the way you want it, you know. It's like I have a love-hate with tube screamers. I hate them. But it's my favorite pedal at the same time. I use it all the time. But when I play it alone in my bedroom, I think it's the worst pedal in the world.
See, and I'm the opposite, that I still love the sound of a tube screamer into a Fender amp with a Strat. But
see, I don't like that sound.
But boosting an amp with it, I've heard that like the guys here boost rectifiers with like every overdrive known to man, and the tube screamer has always been my least favorite whenever they use it, which I know is
that's funny because
go-to.
I love it.
I
love it. I use it in front of like high gain amps all the time. Lower the distortion, just crank the volume. I get that honk. But I've had kids like put their ears, you know, to my speaker cabinets. They're like, holy shit! It's like piercing. It's a nice pick. I'm like, yeah, but the other guitar player in my band plays a semi-hollow. He's got a woofy, beautiful round sound. Where do I equate? Like, where do I go from there, you know? I have to find my little thing. So that's why I always gravitate towards Strat type guitars, Tele type guitars. I need that bite, you know?
Because you want to cut.
I need to cut through. So it's all a balance. Like it has to be musical. Everything you do has to be musical, and depending on the context, the musical context you're playing in, it has to be a bit different, you know? I love shred guitar as well. It's not very fashionable, but I still I have a guitar coach, you know, like that I still work with. And I come from a classical background, where it's funny because it's one guitar, and really it's your hands, you know, making the changes. You don't switch guitars when you play classical guitar. You have one guitar for 10 years and that's the one, you know? But electric is different. So when I do play faster, like I need my nines. I need fast action. I need a flat radius. But when I play in simple plan, I can't do that. Like I hit a lot harder. There's something too, like the bloom. We're talking about new concepts now that are sort of happening. Like we've just started talking about that, hitting less on the strings to let the amp kind of bloom and explode. That's something that I've never heard before. Like the last 2 years, I did it like sort of like by feel. But now I'm actually consciously thinking about it, you know, letting the amp work at higher volumes. They call it the bloom now. And with my band, it's a little bit of both. You know, I do the bloom, and the other guitar player in the band's like slang, slang, slang. He plays 12s, and he's Malcolm Young. You know, like
Yep.
great rhythm. So yeah, I think it's important to have all these tools to be able to switch, and you have to stay inspired. So if that's what it takes, I'm fine with that.
So, okay, speaking of tools, is there a tool right now that you don't think exists that you wish existed for touring with?
That's a good question. Wow. I think that it's been very difficult to find. And it's coming close, but like a great tram that actually works and stays in tune and that doesn't kill the tone.
Well,
And I've heard like Floyds that are better,
yep,
but
yep,
it kind of kills the tone a little bit, you know? And I love what Vega Tram are doing right now. It's amazing.
yep,
But we're getting there. I feel that there's something, but
yeah,
why are guitars so complex, you know, to work with? And I love the fact, like Aristides, for instance, the fact that the guitars don't move. I
Right.
have one on the road right now.
Yep.
I haven't set it up in 2 years.
yep.
So I think we're coming to things that are changing the
Yeah.
guitar game, and it's great. There's a lot of resistance too. When I
Yeah.
show that Aristides to my vintage gear friends, they're like, "What the hell is that?" You know?
Yeah.
I'm like, "It's a beautiful design. It's
Yep.
perfect, that guitar." But you know, like it's not for everybody again.
Yep.
But I think those are the things. To me, the guitar is an imperfect instrument. When I see the fan frets, I'm like, not for me.
Yep.
But good idea, you know,
Yep.
good concept. It's cool. I like the fact that it's out of tune.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that, you know. I think it's kind of sexy that the guitar isn't perfect.
Yeah, 100%. Like I think there's something really interesting about that when you know that, like that there's this human element that's helping create the music that's there. Like
Yeah.
that it's not just completely mechanical, and you know, like that you can wash, rinse, repeat it. Like when there's some sort of spontaneity to it, and I find that a lot of the time, especially when you see players that are playing guitars that most of us would think kind of are pieces of shit, and they are going out of tune. Some of those guys, you see them take solos, and you still can't help but like pick your jaw up off the floor because you're like the sounds that you're getting out of that thing. Number one, I couldn't ever get, but number two, like it doesn't matter if you hit a wrong note. Like you can kind of feel what they're doing. And
Hendrix
like,
wasn't perfect.
Yeah.
You see some shows, he was whacked out of his mind, like, but there was something going on. It was magical. He was tapping onto something special. And I'm a huge Hendrix fan, and I, you know, I've seen him play like awful, like really, really out of tune, just out of rhythm. He was probably high.
Yep.
But man, there was something still going on. And I think that's something that's kind of missing nowadays. I think the gear right now, that what's going on, Evertune has a sick bridge. It's super cool.
Yep.
It's probably too perfect, you know?
Yep.
But I use it all the time in the studio for rhythm parts. I think it's great.
Yep.
But I wouldn't use it live necessarily because it's giving me some troubles. Like I want bending, I want a little out of tune. Like I love the fact that Van Halen was down tuning that second string a little bit to get, you know, the third perfectly.
Yep.
Those things need to happen. I do that in the studio all the time. I play thirds a lot, and I need to retune, punch in, and make sure that it's in tune. To me, it's really important. I'm a piano player first, so I hear those things, and it has to be a certain way.
Yep.
But I love the fact that certain players are just going for it, you know? And I sometimes get glimpses of those moments where I just allow myself to go in, but not enough.
Right.
I think that's what's going on right now. The gear is probably too perfect, and it now, like, we're punching a lot,
Right.
we're quantizing a lot, and but there's also like sort of a resurgence of garagey bands,
Yep.
and that's pretty damn cool to me.
Oh,
you
for
know,
sure.
like imperfect instruments, gear that's not that great. Like the return of the Princeton. I never thought a Princeton was all that great, to be honest. Like it's sort of a very difficult amp to play, but some people make it sound amazing, you know?
Yep.
More pedals, they do it a bit differently than I would. Playing straight into a Princeton is not very inspiring. Not to me, at least.
No,
you know?
it's like, to me, it's always been kind of like stiff and shrill.
Yeah. But some players, man, they do it amazingly well, you know?
Yep.
So, you know, the question is there like you know, what's missing in the gear industry? Nothing. There's so much of it right now. It's super exciting. There's so much stuff I haven't even tried yet. Like,
Yep.
if anything, what sucks is that there's not as many music stores where you could sit down and you know, like Guitar Centers and play Stairway to Heaven for 2 hours and just get away with it. It's too bad that you can't really try all that stuff because it's all online now.
Yeah, and I mean, and even in a lot of stores, I mean, there's a handful of great shops.
There's a lot of mom and pop shops that are sick.
But I find like, you know, even when I go, you know, Sean and I were out touring a bunch of stores, and even stuff that he wants to try. I mean, Sean is a world-class player, and even he, I don't want to say he's intimidated to sit down and play, but he's like, this isn't where I want to play that. You know what I mean? Like, I want to try this piece of gear, but I want to try it at home with my rig.
Absolutely.
I don't want to sit here with it because I'm not going to get an accurate
When I go to a music store, I got like all the salesperson, like people like coming in and waiting for me to make a mistake. It's almost like they're looking at me, they're like, come on, guy, he's a simple plan guy. He's gonna make a mistake for sure, you know?
Yeah.
How is that inspiring? You can't try stuff that way. And the kids that are trying, like I was the kid that tried the gear. We had a store called Steve's Music Store.
Yeah.
And it's still going, like it's still, but it's, you know, it's not the same kind of vibe anymore. But back then, you know, I would try guitars for hours and they would let me. But that doesn't seem to exist anymore. It's unfortunate, you know? Luckily, we could, you know, we could hear demos now online, so it's important, I think.
Yeah. I think that part of that is the fact that, like, there are a lot of people that are intimidated also because of, you know, we make fun of them, but like the Guitar Center shredder, right? Like the dude who's going to go in, or, you know, for the Canadians watching, the Long and McQuaid dude, who's going to go in and he's about to get a record deal at Long and McQuaid and get discovered because he can shred his balls off and he plays Crazy Train nonstop, right? Well, the kid who's coming in, like me going into that shop at 15 who can't play like that, I don't want to sit down next to that guy and start playing because I'm going to feel like an idiot, right? And, or just, you know, feel like I suck. And I think that's, you know, part of the other problem with trying stuff in stores. And that's why I think you get way more people that are more into online. And I mean, thank goodness that online retailers allow for returns and things like that. So if people do decide to take a chance on a piece of gear and it's not their thing, you know, almost everywhere is pretty good about.
But it's funny because videos are great, but at the same time, they're very limiting because I heard the 120 on your demos online. Great players, they're sick players, but they don't play like me, you know?
Yeah.
So I heard them and I was like, yeah, it's a cool amp.
Yeah.
You know, but when I actually tried it, I was like, holy shit. This is serious. And obviously, we're talking a lot about that amp because we're here, but it did really have that effect on me once I tried it. And it really, I probably would have discarded it through the videos. And that's unfortunate, you know? But it is what it is. That's the world we live in now.
Yeah, and you're so, we walk such a fine line because when we work with online, like especially YouTube demo guys, we send them the product. That's it. We wait.
You have no say for sure.
And we don't even try. We wait and like every now and then we get, well, not even every now and then.
Oh, you have sick videos online.
Most of the time, people come back and say like, hey, like, can you tell me the price? Can you tell me like when's it available? Like if it's a new launch. And I'm like, oh yeah. I'm like, well, here's that information. And then I'll say like, do you have any other questions about it? And if they have any technical questions, I point them to either Sammy or Dan. But we try our best that we want you to hear, you know, Fluff's representation of our product, or Ola Englund, or Robert Baker, or Pete Thorne, or whoever who's going to do it. We don't want it to be our influence to those guys and then coming through them. The downfall of that is you're at the mercy of, you know, how they dial things, their hands, their gear, and what they do. And there's lots of products of ours that we've had demos come out where we've said like, oh, like, we're not upset about how it sounds, but like, that's not how it sounds here. And that was actually one of the biggest reasons why the first NAMM show that we ever went to, we brought a soundproof enclosure to, and we've done that every NAMM show we've ever been to, because there is no substitute for getting in a room with an amp, with a cabinet, and hearing what the amp can actually do. That's what's actually going to sell you on it.
The feeling I got the first time I brought my 800 that I just bought for 300 bucks, by the way,
Nice.
back then, on the subway,
Nice.
put it on top of a 412 for the first time in my life, and then you play that first chord. There's no YouTube video that compares to that.
No.
There's no, like, and crank the shit out of it until my parents, like, threw me out of the house. But it was, that feeling, you have to remember that. You have to go back to it. You have to revisit it, that feeling, like, as often as possible. It's important. It's inspiring, you know?
I love that you say that. So I was at one of the first big, like, YouTuber, like, gear-related events was this event in Germany called GitCon that Henning Pauly put on with Framus and Warwick years ago. Excuse me. And Pete Thorne was there, and they had a vintage Plexi with 2 4x12s. And he shot a video, and like one of the things that he wanted to do is there was a bunch of YouTubers there that had only ever really played through plugins and modelers. So they weren't used to tube amps at all. So he shot a video where he brought all of them down to go into this soundproof room to a dimed Plexi and for them to play it and see and feel what that feels like.
Incredible.
Yeah, and every one of them came out were just like, I need a tube amp. And I'm like, yeah, you do. Like, I'm not even shamelessly promoting that you need our tube amp. Yes, you need a tube amp. So every one of you that watches this, if you are into plugins and modeling, I don't care if it's a Revv amp, I don't care what it is, go get a tube amp and do exactly what Jeff just said. Like,
and you know what? I use plugins all the time. All the time because they're convenient. And in a hotel room, you can't crank an amp, a tube amp. There's no way. But I'm telling you, it makes you a better player.
Yep.
Playing with that amp that's imperfect, that moves around, that there's something special about that.
It teaches you dynamics in your playing, right?
Yes.
Like in a way that I don't think that modeling and plugins do. At least not if you're playing through headphones. Like all of our amps have 2-Notes Torpedo embedded tech, which you have Dyne IRs for. So once you buy your Revv amp,
and they're sick too.
You get Jeff's Dyne IRs and away you go. So yeah, they're like there is a place for that, right? Like that was a big thing for me of why I started working with 2-Notes back in the day and why we got into them was that I have kids. I can't play at home. Like the only time I'm at home is at night now, right? And I can't play when they're in bed. Like, so I can though plug into a Torpedo.
On the last record, we did 80% of the tracks through a Torpedo because really, like, real estate is so damn expensive that you rent studios for the drums, and then your whole budget's gone, and then suddenly you're like, all right, well, you know, what do we do for guitars? And I still wanted to use tube amps, and I thought it was a great solution. And truthfully too, it takes away some of the human error, you know, process of miking. Miking a cab is pretty difficult.
Yep.
It is pretty difficult. And engineers have kind of, like, there are still great engineers, and the engineers that we work with are very good at miking, you know, cabs, but it's a lost art. Yeah. You know, and it's very demanding, very demanding.
It's hit or miss. The guys who can do it, that I've worked with, do it unbelievably well. And the guys who don't know how to mic a cab, well, you're going to get what you get.
And I worked with younger people that are great producers that produce mostly pop stuff. Yep. And when they get into the situations where you're tracking guitars, you bring amps, they're like, okay, well, let's get it done. Well, miking an amp takes almost 2 hours.
Yeah.
You know, and they're not going to wait.
Yeah.
So you have to find solutions. Amp, you know, the 2-Notes thing, it just works.
Yep.
You could get tones really quickly.
Yep.
I'm able to have like 3 great tones in 10 minutes.
Yep.
You know, it wouldn't be possible if you're miking a cab.
Yep.
So I think those solutions are great. They're necessary. I think it's cool that you're integrating that stuff into your stuff. Like, you know, I have the lunchbox at home.
Yep.
And it's sick to be able to plug it directly into my sound card.
Yeah.
The kids are sleeping and I'm shredding full like tilt, you know, and nobody's worried.
Yeah.
It's great, you know. So I think it's important. This is a great step forward.
Yeah. And I think you'll see that from more amp companies, you know, along the way. That's just, you know, we kind of called it hybrid amplification.
I was going to say it's a hybrid way of doing things.
Yeah, and I think you'll start to see more and more companies that are going to go that way with having either IR loading or some form of load box and direct out to work.
My guitar coach tells me all the time, he's like, you got to pick every single note. I'm like, huh?
Yeah.
Dude, legato exists.
Yep.
Hybrid picking exists.
Yeah.
Sweep exists. I'm not going to pretend that, like the fork doesn't exist and I'm going to use, like 2 chopsticks.
Yeah.
It's like we're in a different era. It's the same with gear, like you got all this amazing gear. The modelers could coexist with the real amps.
For sure.
And it has to, I think it's great.
I think it has to with the reality of where touring is, right? Like it's, I fully understand that shipping 50-pound tube amps, and especially with the quality of tubes that we've been getting the last,
it's been a problem,
probably
really?
3 or 4 years. Yeah, it's turned the corner now.
Okay.
Honestly, Tube Amp Doctor in Germany essentially found a new factory and got them set up producing proper 6L6s, 6V6s, and stuff like that.
Because I heard about the crazy prices.
Yeah, that was kind of...
I'm not turning my amps on anymore.
Yeah, that was kind of, I don't know, a flash in the pan kind of...
I kind of felt that way.
It was dumb. That's the best way to put it. But, we were having issues getting 6V6s because they just weren't produced anymore. So like for the, the Dynamis like you have, or the Gen 740 or the D20 and G20. And, for a while, like we're having tubes that we ship something to a dealer in Australia, and by the time it arrives in Australia, everything tests fine here. By the time it gets there, tubes all of a sudden turn microphonic, or we start having problems, which in the past was never an issue. So, I can see, like, if you're touring, it's going to be a huge issue, right? And then the weight, right? Like if you've got 2 amps with you or 4 amps with you, depending on if you're running stereo and then you got a backup to each. Like I just saw Smashing Pumpkins a couple weeks ago, and like Billy Corgan's got
his rig
he's got 8 amps with him.
Insane.
Like, and I'm like, I mean, if you can afford it,
sure,
do it. But with the way logistics are for touring right now, it's a nightmare for everybody. I mean, while shipping everywhere costs way too much money now, so carting gear around is no different.
But I think it's, as I said, I think, the modeling stuff is great.
Yeah.
But the real feeling of a real amp, in my studio, I still have a bunch of real tube amps laid out. I do run them, through the torpedo stuff. I think it's the best hybrid. To me, it just works, But I believe in the fact, the feel is still amazing. The sag, I'm not really sure how you describe it. There's something, a squishiness, a movement that you will never get. And the Neural DSP stuff that I use for the plugins are great. They're probably the best I've ever heard, but it's still not the same feel.
Yep.
And that extra 5% matters.
Yep. Like I said, to me, that's the difference between inspiration and not. At least for me as a player. Okay, I have one final question for you, which has nothing to do with any of this. But you're from Montreal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Schwartz,
we play better hockey, yes.
No, you don't. Well, actually, I can't even say that. It's not even true. Come on,
no,
man.
it's not true. I'm saying the truth.
So, Schwartz's or Dunn's?
Oh, gosh, Schwartz is for sure. Are you kidding me? Classic. Still, I think it changed management. It still kills everybody else.
Is it the best?
The best for sure.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Out of all Montreal smoked meat?
I think so.
Okay.
Lester's is pretty close.
Yeah?
Have you had Lester's?
I haven't.
Really good.
Okay.
Really, really good.
So that's the deal. The next time you go to Montreal?
But I also don't like bagels, so I don't know if I'm really credible or not.
I think you're good. So, dude, thanks so much for
a lot,
hanging
man.
out. Cheers.
Cheers.
And check out Simple Plan. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
I'm just a kid.